Imagine knowing exactly who the killer is. You have his name, you have his photograph, you even find him hiding in his apartment. Then somehow he slips away. For the next 2.5 years, an entire country would search for a fugitive who seemed to have disappeared into thin air. This is the case of Tatsuya Ichihashi and Lindsay Hawker. In 2007, Lindsay Hawker had recently moved from England to Japan. She was a bright, ambitious, and beautiful young woman from Coventry who had graduated from the University of Leeds and accepted an English job teaching near Tokyo. Friends described her as kind, intelligent, and adventurous. She was building a life in a new country. But on March 20, 2007, something happened that would change everything. While commuting home, Lindsay was approached by a stranger. His name was Tatsuya Ichihashi. He was 28 years old. According to reports, he struck up a conversation and claimed he was Lindsay's student. At first, the interaction seemed harmless, but Lindsay knew all of her students, and none of them has a name of Tatsuya. There was something unsettling about what happened next. Instead of simply saying goodbye, Ichihashi followed Lindsay after she got off the train. He followed her as she rode her bicycle home. When they arrived at her apartment building, he asked for a glass of water. Lindsay agreed, but she wasn't careless. She reportedly brought him inside while her roommates were present and introduced him to them. It was a subtle precaution, a way of making sure other people knew he was there. During the visit, Ichihashi sketched a portrait of Lindsay and left his contact information. He persuaded her to give him English lessons. Eventually, he left. At that point, there was no obvious reason to think he posed a serious threat, but the encounter had created a connection, one that would prove fatal. On March 25, 2007, they arranged the meet. The lesson began at a cafe. Everything appeared normal. Nothing suggested that this would be Lindsay's final day alive. But after the lesson, Ichihashi said that he forgot to bring the money, so they traveled by taxi to Ichihashi's apartment. Significantly, Lindsay instructed the taxi driver to wait outside. That detail would later stand out to investigators. It suggested she may have been cautious. Perhaps she didn't fully trust him. Perhaps she wanted a quick way to leave if she felt uncomfortable. Nobody knows exactly what she was thinking. What is known is that she entered the apartment and she never came out. The next day, Lindsay failed to show up for work. Her friends immediately sensed something was wrong. This wasn't normal behavior for her. She was responsible, reliable. When she couldn't be reached, concern quickly turned into panic. A missing persons investigation began. Police soon traced Lindsay's last known movements. The trail led directly to Tatsuya Ichihashi's apartment. What happened next almost sounds like a scene from a movie. When officers arrived, Ichihashi was inside, but instead of cooperating, he suddenly fled, barefoot. He escaped through a balcony and disappeared before police could stop him. The officers then searched the apartment. What they discovered was horrifying. Lindsay Hawker's body was found concealed in a bathtub on the balcony. The investigation instantly transformed into a murder case, and the prime suspect had just escaped. For police, the situation was infuriating. They had identified their suspect, they had located him, and yet he had slipped away. A nationwide manhunt began. His photograph was distributed across Japan. Television programs aired his image repeatedly. Police stations displayed posters. Millions of people knew exactly who authorities were searching for, yet somehow he remained free. Days became weeks, weeks became months, months became years. The longer he stayed hidden, the more shocking the case became. How could one of Japan's most wanted fugitives simply vanish? As investigators pieced together his movements, a picture began to emerge. Ichihashi was constantly on the move. He avoided drawing attention to himself. He worked odd jobs. He traveled throughout different parts of Japan. But perhaps the most extraordinary development involved his appearance. At some point during his years on the run, he underwent cosmetic procedures. Authorities later stated that he altered facial features, including his nose and eyelids. Updated wanted posters had to be released, showing possible versions of what he might look like. Think about that for a moment. Most fugitives hide behind fake names. Some grow beards, some dye their hair. But investigators believed this man changed his face. The lengths he allegedly went to avoid capture stunned the public, and with every passing year, frustration continued to grow. Meanwhile, Lindsay's family refused to let the case fade from public memory. From England, they continued campaigning for justice. They gave interviews, they appealed to the public. They worked tirelessly to keep attention focused on the case. For them, every day without an arrest was another painful reminder that the person responsible remained free. Imagine living with that uncertainty, knowing who police believe committed the crime, knowing he escaped, knowing he could be anywhere, yet being powerless to bring him back to court. It was a nightmare that stretched on year after year. Then, after more than 2.5 years on the run, everything changed. In November 2009, workers at a ferry terminal in Osaka noticed something suspicious. A man attempting to board the ferry looked remarkably similar to Japan's most wanted fugitive. Authorities were alerted. Police moved in. The man was detained. Investigators compared fingerprints. The results confirmed what many hoped but almost couldn't believe. The fugitive was Tatsuya Ichihashi. After years of searching, the manhunt was finally over. But the legal battle was just beginning. The case moved toward trial. As evidence was presented, disturbing details emerged. During proceedings, Ichihashi admitted responsibility for Lindsay Hawker's death. He argued that the killing had not been intentional. The court rejected that claim. The judge concluded that Lindsay had been killed to prevent her from reporting the assault. However, questions remained regarding exactly how the events unfolded and what his intentions had been. Prosecutors argued that the evidence demonstrated serious criminal conduct that led directly to Lindsay's murder. The court ultimately found him guilty. In 2011, Tatsuya Ichihashi was sentenced to life imprisonment. For Lindsay's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice. But justice and closure are not the same thing. No sentence could undo what happened. No court ruling could bring their daughter back. Even after his conviction, controversy continued. While in custody, Ichihashi wrote about his years as a fugitive. The book became a bestseller. It was later adopted into a film. Lindsay's family was never contacted during production. No profits were directed their way. The publication generated significant backlash. Many people believed it was inappropriate for someone convicted in such a notorious case to tell his story publicly. Critics argued that attention should remain focused on Lindsay rather than the man responsible for her death. It was a debate that reignited emotions surrounding the case, and for many, it highlighted a larger question: who should be remembered, the killer or the victim? Today, nearly 2 decades later, the case remains one of the most widely known criminal investigations in modern Japan, not just because of the murder itself, not just because of the years long manhunt, but because of how close authorities came to capturing him in the beginning. A suspect identified, a police visit, an escape through a balcony, and then years spent chasing a man who seemed determined to disappear. Yet, despite everything he did to avoid justice, he was eventually found. And that's perhaps the most important part of this story. Because while Tatsuya Ichihashi spent years running from the consequences of his actions, Lindsay Hawker's family never stopped fighting for justice. In the end, the manhunt ended. The trial concluded. The sentence was handed down. But the memory that remains should not be of a fugitive who changed his face. It should be of a young woman who traveled across the world to build a future and never got a chance to see it. And that is the tragedy at the heart of this case.